This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know. Avremel Greenbaum survived World War II, but he lost his entire family. And as hard as it was, he came to America and tried to find a place that was as far away from Judaism as he possibly could. And so he ended up in a small town in Alabama. And just by chance, he married one of the only Jewish women around. Not that he did it intentionally, he ended up falling in love with this woman. And they had 2 children. His oldest son, whose name is Jeffrey, when he turned 13, so Avremel Greenbaum was no longer Avremel Greenbaum. Now he was Aaron Green. And he knew that it was a tradition amongst American Jews to give a very big gift for a bar mitzvah. And seeing as that he wasn't really connected to his religion anymore, but he still was a Jew, decided he was going to buy Jeffrey something really, really big. And so he took Jeffrey, who was 13 years old, to the mall. And he takes him into the biggest electronics store in the mall. And he says to his son, "Whatever you want, Jeffrey, whatever you want, it's yours. Doesn't matter the price, just pick whatever you want." And so the boy looks around the store. And then he notices across on the other side of the mall, looking out the window of the electronics store, he sees there's an antique store. And he's looking at something in the window, and he can't stop staring at it. His father, Aaron Green, he looks at his son and he says, "Hey, what's going on? What are you looking at the antique store for? Look, we've got this whole store here of electronics, really great stuff. You can have whatever you want." But the bar mitzvah boy, he was looking out the window at the antique store, and he just could not take his eyes off of something in the window. And so Aaron Green, the father, he apologizes to the owner of the electronics store, and he says to his son, "Okay, let's go across the mall and see what's there." And so they walk across, and the whole time Jeffrey is still staring in the window. And then he looks and he sees there's a menorah, a Chanukiah, in the window of the antique store. He points to it and he says to his father, "This is what I want for my bar mitzvah." The father says, Are you joking? You can have anything, the latest gadget. I'll spend any amount of money." And the boy says, "Nope, I only want that thing in the window." And he didn't even know what it was. Because even though Aaron Green, Avremel Greenbaum, had grown up in a religious home with a yeshiva education, he didn't teach his kids really anything about being Jewish. They never even lit a menorah. And it would be one thing if this menorah was a silver menorah, an expensive one, but it was a wooden menorah put together from little pieces of wood. He wondered, what is it even doing in an antique shop? It looks like a piece of garbage. So the 2 of them go into the store, and Aaron Green says to the owner, "We want to buy the menorah in the window." And the owner said, "Sorry, it's not for sale." And Aaron Green says, "Wait a minute, not for sale? This is a store, right? You sell things here." The owner said, "Yeah, I sell things, but I'm not selling the menorah." So Aaron Green says he was a wealthy man. He made a lot of money at that point. And he said, "Listen, maybe you don't understand. I'm going to offer you $10,000 for that menorah. $10,000. And the owner shakes his head and says, "Sorry, not selling it." And Aaron Green says, "I don't understand." And the owner says, "Well, let me tell you, when I found out the history of this menorah and about the person who put it together during the war, I decided I'm not going to sell it. It took him months to find the pieces of wood. And to find this type of wood during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, was very difficult. And somehow he pieced this wooden menorah together. Now I know that the menorah survived, but the guy that put it together didn't survive. And so for me, that's a pretty big deal. And if this menorah survived and the man and his family didn't, well, I'm keeping the menorah." So Jeffrey looks at his father and he says, "Dad, I want that menorah." And so the father says, "Okay, I'm going to give you $15,000 for the menorah." And the store owner says, "Okay, $15,000, I'll change my mind." And he says, "Here you go, it's your menorah." And so for this, he buys this menorah made out of little pieces of wood. And the father's thinking, "Oh, Faye, I can't believe how much money I paid for this menorah." But then he sees his son goes upstairs and takes some candles and lights the menorah. And he sees that his son is really enjoying it. And then a few days later, they hear a crash, and their son Jeffrey starts to cry. And the father runs upstairs and he sees the menorah fell on the floor and broke into 1,000,000 pieces. And the first thought that he has is, oy vey, that's $15,000 that fell on the floor and broke into little pieces. But the father, he didn't yell at his son. He thought to himself, why should I yell at him? I mean, there's nothing I can do now. And so, like a good father, he sits down with his son and he says, you know what? Let's try to put it back together. And they tried. They had some glue and they tried to glue it back together. But it was such a mess. There was no way they were going to glue it back together. And then the father sees that one of the wooden pieces has a little hole in it. And in it, there's a tiny piece of paper. It's stuck in that piece of the menorah. So he takes a tweezers and pulls it out, and he sees that the note is in Yiddish. At first, he starts to cry. And the family doesn't understand because Aaron Green, his 2 children and his wife are there, and he's crying. And then he lays down on the floor and he passes out. So now everybody's really worried because they've never seen their father pass out before. And finally he wakes up and he says to them, let me read to you this letter. And so he holds the little piece of paper that was stuck in the menorah and he translated it into English. To whoever finds this menorah, I want you to know that I put this together not knowing if I would ever have the chance to light it. Who knows if I'm even going to see the day when it will be a chance to light it for one night of Hanukkah. Who says that I'll have the chance to light it for the second night of Hanukkah? Most likely I'm not going to survive the war. But if by Hashgacha Pratit, if by divine providence this menorah reaches your hands and you're the person who's reading this letter, please promise me and swear to me that you'll always light this menorah. Promise me that you'll light it for me and for us, my family, who didn't survive the war. Just promise me, if you find this note, you're going to light this Chanukiah for me and my family. And then Aaron Green started crying again, and he looked up at his family, and he started to cry again, and it had a hard time getting the sound out. And he said, do you know who signed this letter? My father signed this letter. This is a menorah that somehow survived the war. My father, my whole family, they didn't survive the war. I'm the only one that survived the war. And I tried to get so far away from Yiddishkeit, from Judaism, but I couldn't. It came after me. And it's clear that this is my father speaking from Olam Haba, telling me, Avremo, never forget you're a Jew. And he said, and isn't that what Hanukkah is all about? Remembering that you're a Jew and lighting the menorah, bringing light to the darkness. And so from that point on, Aaron Green always lit the menorah every year on Hanukkah, along with his wife and his children, and eventually his grandchildren as well. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com. HASIDIC